No slow lanes. Do not lock knowledge in chains. Do not take our rights away. To connect, communicate. No slow lanes. Do not kill our innovation. Do not let money decide our access to information. No slow lanes.
Welcome to Zine Your Research, the podcast series, where we're talking about zines in academia. I am Catherine Hicks, an Arts and Humanities librarian at Tulane University. Today, I'm talking to Omar Dauhajre, Director for Partners for Advancing Health Equity at the Celia Scott Weatherhead School of Public Health and Tropical Medicine, and Carlisle Isley, the Nursing Librarian at the Mattis Library for Health Sciences. And we're talking about zines in public health. So can y'all introduce yourselves further, and what's your background? Why are you here?
Sure. Thanks for having me. As I come to this topic through two different doors. One through the work that we do at Partners for Advancing Health Equity, which is to bring multiple sectors together that have a stake or do work around health equity in an effort to harmonize the work and steer the ship towards actionable solutions for a healthier and more equitable society. And a lot of that work has to do with, sharing our resources, communications, and connecting with all sorts of different sectors in society. So communications, it's a big part of the work that we do. But I also have experience working with zines in the past, which I can get into a little bit further later on.
I'm desperate to know more about.
But yeah, for a good amount of my younger years, I used to edit a zine about the underground music scene in Puerto Rico, where I'm originally from.
Beautiful. Carlisle.
Hello. Thanks for having me. I come from zine making from an art degree in the past, but more recently as the nursing librarian, I've been really thinking about how it could influence health literacy in communities and how when you talk to residents, you need to counteract misinformation that they're collecting and just giving them the resources that they need. And figuring out a way to communicate that, because they're also working in communities, and it's how do you get there?
Yeah, I think this episode more than any other is the thing that comes up the most when we're talking about the value of zines as a tool of academic research communication. I've had a lot of these conversations with a lot of people and a lot of different factors, and it somehow always, no matter what we're talking about, comes back around to the idea of public health. But to sort of kick us off, what are some of the biggest challenges with health communication and getting these ideas into the community, getting this research into a community that is actually affected by what's happening?
There's a few of those. I would say the biggest challenge is just, in some ways, the wealth of information and the wealth of avenues to share information that exists, and that creates an issue where it's not as easy for people to find the information from the trusted sources of information, and in ways that are digestible,
right?
And in ways that resonate to all sorts of different communities and sectors of society. There's also a lot of misinformation and disinformation that exists in the current landscape and in the current historical moment, but it's not something that just happened. Misinformation and disinformation has existed, for as long as there has been information, because there's always different ways in seeing things, but also different kinds of agendas. And I think that's where zines are a good conduit for folks to be able to create their own ways to communicate with their communities, but also being able to share the kind of information that's relevant and important for their communities and their environments.
Right. Yeah. I think it's interesting to think of it as a sort of whole life cycle of information that I think when we're talking about zines, we're talking maybe specifically about the end result of communicating the information, but it is also in terms of health equity, what information is being studied, what information is being produced in the first place, and is that information actually relevant to people's lives?
And I just want to add, zines are participatory in nature. So there's I guess there's ways in which you can do a zine without having, other people participate. And in fact, there's plenty of zines that are just, ways of conveying either ideas or art or reflect on, kind of the musings in people's minds. But for the most part are participatory. So that's what makes them a good conduit to be able to be equitable in the way that it shares information.
So this may be a great place to ask one of my favorite questions that I ask everybody, and I would like to ask both of you, which is, what is your personal definition of a zine?
That's a great question. I can tell you about my experience and how I got to zine making, because I haven't really thought of a definition of zines. Back when I was growing up in Puerto Rico, I participated in the punk rock scene in the island, which in many ways is the genesis of a lot of the zines that we know about these days. This was back in the 90s, and the scene that I created was an effort to be able to share with our peers in the island and in different regions of the island what was happening in the town where we were, which was the capital, San Juan, but also bring interviews and information about bands and zines and scenes from other parts of the world into the island. At that point, there were a few fanzines that had been already in circulation. There were plenty of people communicating and trading records or cassettes with other folks around the world. So there was a network. And what we did was kind of tap into those networks and just try to interview and talk about things that we like about the music that was happening in the island, but also on the outside. And on the second zine that I did at the time was called Boricuas Bestiales, which loosely translates into like hardcore Puerto Ricans. And part of the concept, or the design concept, was to have on the cover the faces of the people who were part of the scene. And that was a way for us to be able to have people pay attention, and the people who were in the cover say, check out this scene. It has my face in the cover. So it's really cool. But also for people on the outside to be able to see the people and the characters, so to speak, that were part of our scene. But there was also, people reflecting about their communities and their realities, either through the music that they were explaining in interviews or through essays. There was art, there was design, and it was a collective effort. So I guess to summarize all of that, that's my definition.
That is the definition.
That is the
Yes.
definition.
Carlisle, what's your definition of a zine?
I think zines, I don't think there's one definition for a zine or a book, because I've seen it in many different formats. But a zine to me is something that isn't precious. Like, it's meant to be passed around. It's meant to be disseminated to other people in a certain way. And, like, if it ends up in the trash can, that's okay. Then it might have not been for that person at that time. But just, like, having one piece of paper with all of the information that you could ever need is amazing to me. The action of making a sheet of paper and disseminate it however you want is, like, so powerful. And you can do it however you like. And I know I keep saying that.
No, there's a lot of freedom in zines.
Yeah.
And I think y'all are both hitting on something that I also want to talk about, which is sort of what makes a zine different from any other type of ephemera. What do you think are some of the unique strengths of zines that make them maybe better or different or distinct, at least, from that type of just like a brochure in the doctor's office?
Yeah, I would say that the unique character and appeal of a zine, it's very important because it's made by someone who's intentionally trying to convey a very specific point of view or idea. So that makes it unique. It's something that oftentimes is handmade and with very low to none budgets. So what that means beyond that is hard work is that is work that's made out of passion and interest, because you want to do this not because someone is paying you, it's because you feel that there is a need for this kind of publication. So I think that's what will make it, or what makes it unique and different from a pamphlet. But I would say that zines convey those ideas and that information in different ways. There's different avenues within a zine to convey ideas and information. So,
and I think this is also a question of, like, if we're talking about the whole life cycle of creating, producing, and disseminating information, then we're talking about zine making also as a sort of pedagogical approach, as a way of thinking about the information that you're producing. Maybe right from the beginning, maybe to come back to the idea of, from the beginning of thinking of what we are going to be researching, also thinking of this end result of we're going to be working directly with a community to produce a zine. Because I think another thing in our notes that I'd love to talk about is the idea of like shared authorship and trust and building this information together, rather than just always thinking of it as extractive, but rather thinking of, from the very beginning, it is a partnership between the people doing the research and the people that will be benefiting from the research. Yeah,
in my experience, my friend Javier, with whom I did our zine, we were the editors of the zine, but there was no really an editorial line to the zine. It was more of a title that we gave ourselves as the people who kind of gather all this information together. But like you say, kind of the editorial line and the approach of the zine came out of the different elements that were within it: the interviews, the record reviews, the essays, the photos. So, yeah, like I said before, I think zines are kind of the perfect, equitable, and participatory vessel of information where everyone can put their interests in when they're passionate about conveying this information.
I think it also humanizes that information, which is maybe especially important in the medical field.
That's the key word, yeah.
Yes.
There's two things that I'm really interested in to talk about in this topic of zines. One is kind of the historical value of zines, and you're librarians and archivists, so and that is that they are snapshots of the times in which they were prepared, because they tend to focus on the now, and if you're ever interested in knowing what was happening in, I don't know, the Czech Republic in 1985, you would be able, if you find an archive that might contain that, to know and see what was happening musically, but also politically, and in society. What were people's musings and ideas and worries at the time. So there's a big historical value for zines as documents of the times in which they were created.
Right. They can be such a valuable, cross-section. I think going back to your point earlier about zines don't have to just be one thing. Like, one thing that sort of differentiates them from a pamphlet is the whole point of a pamphlet that you would get in a doctor's office is that it is everything you need to know about this one topic and nothing else. And it sort of simplifies the information in that way. But a zine can be more holistic. It can talk more broadly about a specific topic, but in terms of the fact that people are not just one thing. I think in terms of humanizing this information, it is like made by a person and handed to you by a person, but it is also human in the sense that it can be a cross-section of different things. It can approach things from a variety of different ways.
Yeah, I would say it's human, democratic, and equitable.
But this leads to the question, are zines meant to be in an archive because they're meant to exist as they were? And you can have a box of zines, but whoever is doing the organizing and the cataloging might not know anything about the zine or that place. And are they cataloging it correctly? Are they asking the question like, oh, does this need to be digitized, not digitized?
How do you capture all of the context of a particular moment of time? Yeah, when it's removed inherently from that context. But I think that also brings up another interesting question, which is the sort of limitations of zines as a tool of communication. Because Carlisle brought up, like, information on the internet is great if you have a device and steady, regular access to the internet. But then if you don't have either of those things, then that's useless to you. So what are, in your minds, are there any limitations to zines as a form of communication?
There's always been a limit to kind of how you put this together and what it can do. But I think by virtue of zines being creative outlets, it allows for creative people to bring the solutions to those limits.
Yeah. Gosh, I think about that a lot, especially in terms of health information. We talked earlier about like information overload, about how there's just part of the problem with health communication is not that there's not enough of it. It is the opposite. There's too much information out there, and a lot of it is either inaccurate or intentionally inaccurate. So in producing a zine, you are in a way producing more information. You are putting more information into the information, I don't know, highway, super highway. Oh my gosh, do we use a throwback term? But zines, I think, because they can be anything, and because they can be creative, and because you can bring in creative people doing interesting things, you can, think of ways to cut through that noise. And in an age where everything is on social media and now everything is on the internet, I think having a physical thing is such a radical way of cutting through that noise, of saying, like, put down your phone for a second and just read this little booklet that I made for you. And then when you're done reading it, go hand it to somebody else, and disseminating it through the community in that way.
Yeah, they also tend to fly under the radar. So, because they're limited numbers of distribution, they tend to be, for the most part, locally minded. So I think that's another interesting and cool point about zines that I guess can go either way.
Yeah, because that comes back to trust, right? Is if it's about a local community, is it feeling like it is for a local community coming from someone that actually cares and is a part of this local community, or does it feel like an institution coming into a community and like, I don't know, that can feel very scary as someone coming in and handing out literature when you don't know who they are or what their motivations are and all of that. So yeah, I think zines are a great tool, but it takes a lot of building to get to that point. One of my favorite zines, and one that I think is really important in terms of conversations like this, which is called DIY Doula. And it's put together by nurses and other medical professionals. And they put it up for free online. There's a PDF available online, though you can donate to their cause. And they do update it with new information about laws and things. But they intentionally tell people to print it out and then leave it on a park bench or put it on a table in a library in a university. They understand that this information can be dangerous for people to seek out. I don't know. I think it's such an interesting and important case when we're talking about public health and issues of public health and how so many issues of public health become politicized and so then can become obviously seeking out medical information should not be politically dangerous, but it can be politically dangerous. There's also a great zine called Dr. Rad's Queer Health Show, which is all about trans health and about questions to ask and what you actually need to know and things like that. So in this era when unfortunately, more and more medical information is becoming politicized, zines can maybe be a way of getting people the information that they need in a way that they don't have to put themselves at risk. Yeah.
That's a key because if you're able to convey that information without the stigma of, you're getting medical advice, right. Then it's doing what it needs to do. It's conveying the message in a way that's useful. But that is also going to be understood by the people who seek it. Our project, Partners for Advancing Health Equity, lives under the office of the dean of the school. And here at the School of Public Health, I recently discovered a zine that's done by students. And so in talking about, finding, which I think it's also a really cool piece of what a zine is finding them
right in the wild.
Places where you find them, and in talking about the places and in finding the process of finding the zines and information where they are in the places where you need to find them or maybe where you will not expect them to find them.
Have you found them in unexpected places?
It was unexpected to find it because I didn't know it existed. It was beautiful to see it and find it at the dean's office, which says a lot about kind of the connections that exist. Right. But also because it was very important and relevant to the work that we do. So it basically inspired a lot of thoughts. And a lot of ways in which we can be better and do better with our own work.
Yes, we love the public health zine in the libraries. We actually just partnered with them to get some of the past issues into our digital collection. So we'll also have linked in the show notes the digitized versions of those zines that are in the library's collection. But I also think it's so fascinating how that zine gets produced and what they're doing with it. And finding it in the dean's office is kind of funny also. It kind of exists as a brochure that you would get. But I know that that's not the only thing that they do with it. But it is fun always to see students
Have you ever found them in the wild?
I've never found one in the wild, but I want to.
Out
Not really.
out into the community.
No, but I'm also on the Uptown campus, so I feel so far removed from the work that y'all do downtown with the all of the medical school things. Have you ever? That was a leading question. Have you ever found one in the wild? Or are you waiting for
I've
it?
never found one in the wild. Like, they appear in the library. But yeah, I've never found one in the wild, and I guess I think a lot about intention when making a zine or finding a zine. Like, is this for, like, is that public health zine for the community of New Orleans, or is it just for the community
Of the School of Public Health?
Yeah, the School of Public Health in Tulane.
Right.
Like, it's becoming more accessible with, like, it being digitized. So new students and past students can look at the work, but at some point, and, like, it stops publication, then what do you do?
Right, but I think this comes back to the idea of intentionality in terms of zines. I think we're not necessarily just talking about, like, making a zine because zines are fun, although you should make a zine because zines are fun, but also, like, we're talking about building trust in a community and making sure that the information is relevant and accessible to a community, and that takes knowing the community. So yes, it also takes, like, intentionality in what community do you mean? Do you just mean, like, I'm going to stick it in the dean's office because this is for, like, basically advertising for the School of Public Health, which I don't think it is. I think that was just one of the many places that it was. But how do you get zines out into the community? Do you just go wander around leaving them on park benches?
I mean,
No.
if we could circle back to DIY doula.
Oh, yeah. I love talking about this.
I mean, like, we've talked about it before, but I went and printed it out as, like, an academic thing, and it's just in my office. And I'm like, oh, I should print more and disseminate them. But also, I just want to
have it. You can have your own copy.
Yeah, I just want it.
Yeah,
for
well, that's part of another great thing about zines is you can print out 25 of them and then Xerox 100 more and then staple them and throw them everywhere. You can have, they're not precious, as you said earlier. You can keep a copy in your office. You can keep 10 copies in the dean's office. Yeah. And then you'll still have hundreds more to, I don't know, throw around. We like throwing things around in New Orleans.
But then it leads back to intentionality. Like, it being in an academic setting was never the intention, even though the people that are exposed to zines are usually in the academic setting because we have access. And
we also have access to the information to talk about the public health. Like, and I think that is why, again, it comes back to a partnership, is, like, institutions have a ton of resources, both in terms of, like, the research output that is produced by universities, but also coming back to your original question of, like, archives. Archives exist on university campuses by and large because there's space and there are trained archivists and there are temperature controlled rooms where you can have things and preserve them. So all of these resources exist in the academy, and they are worthwhile resources, but they can be hoarded by institutions. So how do you, in partnership, share those resources with the communities that these institutions exist in?
And in speaking of the kind of going back to the intentionality of it, I think that the places where you find them are very important. What that means is that someone intentionally thought about where to put them. But for the person who receives it, it might also be a way to get to know a place or get to know a community. Just because you found that in this place, say, okay, well, why is this scene here?
Yeah.
You know, why is it relevant to this community or to this environment or to this office? So I think, and just by experience, there is a very intentional and well-thought process of distributing these things and where you put them and where you place them, because that means that you're trying to engage folks in that place, but it also has value for the person who gets it from that place. Another, I think, very important value of scenes, the intentionality, but also the kind of the process of creating them has also built careers and skill sets on people that they might or might not know that they have. In my case, for example, is what eventually inspired me to go into doing a graduate degree in communications. And folks who contributed to it are either now musicians or people who do design for a living and that kind of stuff. So it's an outlet also for people to be able to share their skills and in many ways and hopefully their passions.
Yeah, and to be whole people. Yeah. To not just have to you have to put away the band you were in college and be the medical professional now. You can be a person that is musical and also I love that. and
for me, in many ways, that kind of education is how I approach my work. And wherever I go and I talk about my work and my positionality, I always talk about my experience and where I come from and how I got to this point. And a big part of my, political education, about how I administer and manage a project, how I find ways to do the work that we do, even when resources are lacking. Kind of the DIY aspect of scene making have been very important. I would say. Super important to my own professional and personal growth. This, I'm the person who I am, and I do the work that I do because of those experiences.
Right. One thing that we haven't talked about with zines is zine collectives. A big part of the reason why people form zine collectives is because they are producing zines about politically dangerous ideas. And it sucks that medical information is in any way politically dangerous. But especially in this time, it is. There's a lot of information that is politically dangerous. So I think looking at the history of zine collectives, I think would be fascinating for students who want to produce zines, but rather than using the name of an institution, which may or may not have historical distrust within a community, maybe you form a zine collective. So how do you communicate this information in a way that makes someone feel trusted and seen and safe, and that is coming from a human, but not a human that they don't trust, or not a doctor in a white coat? That can be very triggering for people.
We're in a unique space within the School of Public Health because we work on health equity, and in many ways that health equity can be approached from different perspectives, and it's not only an end, but it's also a practice. So you might be doing this work without realizing it, right. And zines, just by the nature of what they are and how they're put together, are that kind of practice. Right. In fact, it's the kind of practice that a lot of people from different sectors who are trying to approach equity are still kind of trying to figure out how to do. In a way that's equitable, participatory, and trustworthy. So even if you're not explicitly talking about health, you might be practicing, or you are definitely practicing equity as you're doing, as you're putting together a zine. I would also say that it being a fun process, it's an important part of it.
I don't want to make it seem like I'm anti-fun. Zines are still fun, and you should still make zines because they're fun.
Exactly.
But also think about
it's a lot of work. Yeah, it's not easy work. It's a lot of work. It exposes the people who are putting it, to whatever might come out of ideas that might not be palatable for everyone. But it's also an avenue. It's a fun process. And it's a practice of equity in itself. Even if you're not talking about public health, and you're talking about music or codes, most likely people are going to be talking about the things that are important to them that connect to health. Maybe they're talking about the challenges that their communities face with, lack of clean water, for example, or being in a war-torn country. All of those things affect health in one way or another. So, yes.
Yes.
That's what I wanted to say.
Zines, yeah. So I'll say, there's one last question to wrap up. If there is a postdoc or a professor or students listening to this who are like very inspired to do these sorts of projects, whether it's a zine or it's a comic or it's a podcast, they either want to do it or they want to assign it for a class and they want to start doing this work, what advice would you give to them? 1, email Omar and let him know about it. 2.
Yes.
Email me.
2, email Carlisle. What's the third thing?
I would say just identify the people who might be more connected to these ideas. If you're a student, talk to your professors and say, I'm really interested in doing a fanzine or a podcast or a comic as a project for class. Is there a way to connect it? More often than not, people will be open to that, or will try to help you and encourage you to pursue it in some way. I'm sure that reading traditional papers all the time
gets boring.
might get boring. So adding maybe even just adding some of that flair into the work that you're doing could be important, and just go around, especially for students, but also for faculty and even staff at the university level. Check what's out there. There might be, stuff happening, projects that are happening within schools that you might or might not know about, and that might be, places where you can contribute and contribute with these kinds of ideas or these kinds of projects. So, again, one of the learnings from this journey is get involved.
Right. And we have show notes, so we'll also have information on the Student School of Public Health zine that does already exist, and that is a great zine that we all love here, and you can contribute to.
I guess my piece of advice is there should be no pressure.
Right.
To make it perfect. And, there should be happy accidents, because research is supposed to be fun.
Research is supposed to be fun.
There should be no pressure, but you should be excited about the topic that you're working on. But, be free in the creation process.
Thinking more about passion and humanity and interest and art.
Yeah, and empathy when you're creating this thing that you're trying to give to a community. And you do need to create trust if you're going to come into a space that you're unknown.
So, it's not just about finding, things on campus, which is still very important and cool, but also, go to a coffee shop and read the flyers and join a club and integrate yourself more into the community that you're trying to serve, so you can figure out how they would like the information communicated to them. And find partners. I think that is what you are both saying in a way, is find community, find partners, talk to professors, talk to colleagues, but also talk to the community.
It's a way also of creating a space. So if there's not a zine in your school or in the community that you're in, then create one. That's the whole point of this thing. It's do it yourself. It might also be in the context of academia a good avenue for sharing ideas that you might have stumbled upon while you were doing your research that you thought were interesting or cool to share, or maybe even to talk about the things that went wrong. What were the unexpected things that came out of something that also have a lot of value in them.
That's great. Well, thank you both so much for this conversation. The one I have in many ways been looking forward to the most, even though it is the most outside of my wheelhouse. Thank you both so much for this conversation, and thank everyone for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That
was cool.
Yeah, that was fun.
Do not take our rights away to connect, communicate.